Hi, I'm Matt from Unbearable73. Let's get right into this episode today. So, this is episode 44, if you're counting. This is about deaths of long-running characters in TV shows, and spoilers. There'll be some discussion of the most recent episode of FBI Most Wanted, and some older stuff that, if you haven't ready to watch it, you will be spoiled. So, let's get right into it. What inspired this episode? Well, you see on the screen is a web article which I linked to below in the summary if you want to read it. There's an interview and a discussion. The article is about the most recent episode of FBI Most Wanted, episode 14, season 3, and it contains both the writer's thoughts and an interview with the showrunner. So let's get going. So I recently watched this episode. I knew kind of going into it because of I had read an article or two like the one here beforehand, and honestly, I don't care about spoilers. So I knew the characters were going to be killed off before I went into the show. And to be honest, as I said, I don't care about spoilers for almost 99% of whatever I read, watch, or listen to, whatever. It's just there's maybe I could think of maybe 10 or less movies or books that you should never be spoiled on because they ruin the what's happening in it. The Usual Suspects, another movie called The Shrine, maybe a few others, but those are two most obvious examples I could think of. So the issue that we're going to address, if the topic wasn't a clue, is the death of the lead character or lead characters. And I don't mean when it happens in the context of the fulfillment of the product. So if the character dies at the very end of the movie or the book or the TV show and it's a heroic death and it's purposeful and it's part of the conclusion, I'm not talking about that. Okay? I'm talking about somewhere in the middle of the show's run or the movie's run or the series of movies or the book or the comic or whatever, where the character is killed off. Okay? So, FBI Most Wanted is one of the 3 FBI shows on CBS that are in what we call the Law and Order universe. They all occur in the same universe that the Law and Order shows occur in, the Chicago shows occur in, and it's actually bigger than that. But I'll do a whole other article on that one. FBI Most Wanted is usually the best of the 3 on any given week. FBI International is saddled with an unlikable lead character, and the FBI gets caught up in a lot of wokeism in its plots. Although this week was a pretty good episode that sort of subverted that expectation. It had a classic Law and Order style twist. This particular episode of FBI Most Wanted is very good. I'm not going to turn this into a review for that episode. I just say it was a 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 in terms of quality. But the actual death, I'd rate it a 10 out of 10. How the narrative structure, how they did it. They did not do anything over the can I pronounce English anymore? They're not doing anything overly melodramatic, and they didn't leave any possibility he survived off screen or they faked his death or anything like that. And the death was in the line of duty, protecting an innocent person, but it wasn't like some sort of again, overly melodramatic or contrived death. It just happened the way it might be for a real law enforcement officer doing his duty. There was a confrontation with a criminal. And he was protecting an innocent person, and he got shot, and he died, and that was that. But it was done well. That's the point I'm getting at. And they dealt with the aftermath as well, immediate aftermath, I say, where his family had to be informed what was going on. And his family were the main supporting actors in the show outside of the primary cast, which I'll address a bit more later. So the episode dealt with it very well. But a lot of times when this happens in the show, it's often the case where it destroys the show or other cases. Let's give you some examples. One of the most famous or infamous deaths, depending on your count, was when Edith Bunker died off screen between the last episode of All in the Family and the first episode of the second season of Archie Bunker's Place. For reference purposes, the first season of Archie Bunker's Place, even though it occurred after the last season of All in the Family, occurred kind of during the same time period as the last season of All in the Family. Okay, even though it was aired later. It's just the way they did it, because I think they weren't sure if Gene Stapleton could be convinced to come back for Edith or not. Edith was very sick in the final episode of All in the Family, but there was nothing indicating she would die. But then we didn't hear or see anything about Edith in the first season of Archie Bunker's Place. And then all of a sudden, in the opening of the second season, we found Edith had died of a stroke off screen. And the reason Edith died was because Gene Stapleton wanted to leave the show. She was willing to return for occasional appearances, but she had thought her character had run its arc and really couldn't do anything else with the character. But the show's runner, Norman Lear, he took it personally. I think he thought Edith, he wrote Edith as inspired by his mother, so he just basically killed her off. And the opening episode of Archie Bunker's Place Season 2, two-parter called Archie Alone, it's probably one of the best examples. It's one of the best TV episodes of all time. It's probably one of the best examples of how to properly write a character dealing with a death. Okay? And but unfortunately, even though the episode was written well, the show did not survive his death because All in the Family, and they tried to make Archie Bunker's Place about Archie and his being a bar runner after he retired from his regular job, but we thought of Archie as in context of the relationship with Edith, and their relationship was the core of that show. And when Edith was gone, they could have done something different, but for whatever reason, narratively, they couldn't make us flip to making the show just about Archie and the bar, and in a way that made us want to continue watching it with multiple seasons. So another famous death that you might have heard was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Buffy and Dawn's mother, Joyce, she had a brain tumor for a while, and they did, as I recall, mention they were going to kill her, but unless you were into some obscure, if you had read some fanzine, because there was no internet, the internet existed, but there was no massive web publications back then like we have now. So unless you read some obscure, to the mainstream obscure fan magazines or had some inside info that you had got by knowing someone, the fact that Joyce Summers was going to die was not something that the general audience was aware of. And but we did know she had the brain tumor, which was killing her. But most of us expected Joyce to get resurrected, or to get when she died to get resurrected, or to be a fake out, or to be some sort of magic thing to happen, or whatever. But at the end of the episode, in season 5, Buffy came home, found her mother dead on the couch, and the next episode dealt with all the characters dealt with Joyce's death, because Joyce was sort of the morals. Joyce was the sort of one of the moral centers of the show, especially after Giles had left it, which I think was in season 3. The mentor role, he was the mentor moral center. Buffy matured and became the leader of the team, so the new moral center in the sense of connecting the characters and the familial loyalty and all that was Joyce. Joyce's house was the gang's place and all that. And when Joyce died off, that was a big loss, and they dealt with it very well in the episode. And Buffy carried on pretty good through the 6th season. The 7th season was crap, And you'd have to probably the most infamous death in TV history, though, was the death of Bobby Ewing on soap opera Dallas. Which the death was so badly received, and the seasons and episodes following that so bad in terms of viewer participation. The show's right decided to just make it a bad dream of Bobby's wife. The entire season from his death on, they had an episode, I think it was the beginning of the next season or whatever, where she just woke up and he was in the shower, and he had dreamed his whole death and everything happened after that. Which is one way to get rid of it, but that's a whole infamous scene. So there have been a bunch of other deaths in TV shows and stuff that have gone well or badly. And like I said, I'm not talking about the deaths in the conclusion of a series, say Dean died in the last episode of Supernatural, or who else? What's coming to mind? Well, you guys know what I mean. I'm not going to belabor the point. Going on about 50 episodes, different things where people die at the end of the episode. But here's some deaths that you might have heard of. In MASH, the first Colonel on the show, Colonel Henry Blake, he left the show when the actor McLean Stevenson got offered to headline his own show, and they decided to kill him off. And I don't think I remember they didn't even tell him they were killing him off. Not that it matters, because in a sitcom back then, they would never have had him back on. It's just the nature of the beast. But so they decided to kill him off, and it just came in at the end of an episode where they were notified by the military command that Colonel Henry Blake had died while on a helicopter on the way to Tokyo or something like that. And then there was little mention after the characters and their relationship with Henry and all that. But and MASH tend to deal with it as well as it could, because it was a comedy with dramatic elements, kind of the opposite of a dramedy, which is a drama with comedic elements. MASH had some very serious topics they confronted, but they always had the context of a comedy addressing that, with the exception of a couple of episodes. So another famous one, which people know, is Edward Stark on Game of Thrones. When we first read that in the book, Edward was presented as the main character, the protagonist, at the beginning of a multi-book series, and when he died, Martin threw us for a loop, and that was a good example of subverting expectations, the proper way to do it, because as we found out later, Edward's death had been planned since before the novel even got written in its form. It was, there's an outline of what the original synopsis that George presented to the writers, to the publishers rather, and you could find Edward's death mentioned in there. And it blew people's mind in the books, and it was even funny when it happened on a TV show. All of us who read the books knew it was coming, but just go into YouTube and type, Edward Stark death reactions, and you will find some hilarious meltdowns people taped of themselves. Another example in Game of Thrones is Robstar. Unlike Edward's death, Robstar was a last-minute alteration that Martin dreamt up, literally. If you find an interview, he said he dreamt it up one night, and the steal was so good he had to put it in. He derailed his whole book series and changed. I think at one point he had said he'd written like hundreds of thousands or 1,000 pages of writing after the time period where the Red Wedding had taken place. He had to change all of that. He derailed the whole book series, which is why we're still waiting for book 6, 15 years later, just for that one awesome scene he put in there. And but when it happened in the show, and in a way similarly to the narrative of the show, to be honest, again, go look on YouTube for the reactions to the Red Wedding. You'll find another set of hilarious reactions. Another death that narratively was not handled well was Bobby Singer on Supernatural. The death, not so much him dying, but killing him off was such a bad idea that they basically reversed it twice. They had Ghost Bobby come back for, I think, half a season, and then Alt Reality Bobby came back for, the last 2 seasons, until they killed him off again, from what I understand. What I remember, I'm sorry. It's a little wonky with those last season of Supernatural, all the reality warping that was going on. And another death was Roseanne. I mean, the original Roseanne, not the farce it is now that the Connors is. Dan Connor was killed off on Roseanne because the actor wanted to leave the show and wanted more money or something like that. So they killed him off, and then it turned out, oh no, it was another dream. He came back, but then it turned out that was all in Roseanne's head. In the final episode, she was writing a book about her memoirs to deal with her grief, and then they retconned all that in the new show. Well, it turns out all that was never happened, and then they killed Roseanne off, and we get garbage, Okay, and to those of you who are familiar with South Park and the character of Kenny dying repeatedly, originally it was a sort of joke that they did, but they kept it going as a sort of mockery of deaths in TV shows that have no effect on the plot. So where does all this lead? First, I think that when a decision is made to kill off a main character in a franchise, which usually affects TV shows, but affects movies, anime, animation, comic books, manga, and books, the writers and the editors need to seriously consider if it's even possible to continue after the death. I mentioned with the death of Edith and All in the Family, or another show that some of you might not have heard of, Chico and the Man, with Freddie Prinze, a great actor. And the show was built, he committed suicide, sadly, in real life, but they tried to continue the show with his cousin being Chico's cousin, but he did not have the same relationship with the actor who played the man, whose name escapes me at the moment. But that Freddie Prinze did. And that show is built about a relationship, the chemistry the actors and the characters had together, and they really should have just terminated it when Freddie Prinze died. It just had finished the season. And although I will say the episode where the man finally, Charlie, his name was Charlie, character name was Charlie, where he finally addresses Chico's death on screen, was one of the better episodes for a character addressing another character's death you'll ever see. It was a case where an actor really acted well. Uh, so, um, the next thing is, if you're going with ahead with the death, the narrative of the death itself can be damaging. For example, in Criminal Minds, which show I watched, it was a show I always like to watch in like 5 episodes at a time. So usually halfway through the season, I like watch half of that, and next weekend the next half, and But they made one of the original characters on the show, who to me was the center of the show, of course, with the great Mandy Patinkin playing him, was a character named Gideon. And he left the show after the 3rd year for legitimate reasons on the actor's part. He had trouble. He was one of those, I think they call them method actors or whatever, where you're so into the role that they start to experience like the dark emotions that the character might be feeling. It was driving him a little crazy, so he had to take a step back from it, So he left the show. And he was never willing to come back. So in something like the 10th season, they decided that they were just going to kill his character off screen. They even have another character reprise the role for one episode. Even Mandy Patinkin wouldn't have come back. I don't know, they would or wouldn't have, because I heard they didn't even ask. But I don't know that for a fact. So I'm just saying, if he refused to come back, they should at least have another actor playing him to come to do it. They could even do he was in a horrible accident and had plastic surgery. I would have been fine with that just for this one episode. Okay, so to kill an integral character like that off screen, and that's bad enough, but then to have him killed off by a serial killer, basically he's a plot point in a murder from pointless, nameless serial killer whose backstory had to be invented to be expansive and awesome, basically, for this episode. So to me, and after that, I just couldn't watch the show. I had no respect for the writing on the show after that, to just callously disregard an integral character like that. I mean, Law and Order did it with Michael Moriarty, but at least his death, he legitimately wasn't even coming back to the United States to even film an episode, because he had gone crazy in real life. So I can understand that, and they used his death. They had him die off screen, but it was a normal, like, natural death, like the lawyer character had aged into the 70s or something like that, and had his funeral as an introduction to have his son, the character played by his son, the character who was his son, played by Michael Winfield, the actor he was the lawyer on Chicago Law, and then he returned to New York to be the prosecutor on Law and Order SVU. When Chicago Law was canceled, and to be honest, they should have brought him back for this new Law and Order. I don't like the lawyer they have on there, but that was another case where a character being killed off screen was done respectfully in a sense to the original character. It wasn't like part of some murder plot, or it was just the character got older and died, and that was that, And it was tied into his son, the character of his son, being in the show. I mentioned Supernatural struggling to kill Bobby, twice. So they had to bring him back 2 or 3 times, technically. The series called Highlander, the series, that lost its footing when they not by killing off the character of Richie, but by how they did it, which was basically Duncan killing him while he's under possession by being driven crazy by an evil demon, basically, which was stupid. Another one that derailed the show. Okay, anyone who either read the comic The Walking Dead or followed comics up to know, like, The Walking Dead's plot, knew that Glenn was going to be killed by Negan. We knew that going into that episode. Even if we didn't know that when it came out in the comic years ago, by the time The Walking Dead was a show and the comic was so far ahead of it, you read it in the comic news about, what are they going to do when they get to the point where Negan kills Glenn, or this other thing happens. And so the show we knew going into that Glenn was going to be killed by Negan. Those of us who either read the comic or read of the comic, so to speak. Whereas the mass TV audience did not. Now, here's a point to understand, okay? Even though a comic book or a manga, whatever, can depict, a show can be based on it, because TV is continuous, whereas a comic might show a scene, then another scene, and you build what happens between those scenes in your head, the show has to actually show the events in sequence. In other words, like, the show, in other words, I'm trying to put it a good way people understand if you don't understand what I'm saying. If the show is showing Godzilla fighting, the comic is showing Godzilla fighting King Kong, and the fight takes 6 pages, you're not going to see every single, like you might see a panel of Godzilla's punching Kong, and the next one Kong punches Godzilla, but you're not going to necessarily see all the steps in between. You're just going to see the last step in the punch. But you know that after Kong was knocked back 500 meters by Godzilla's punch, he'd have to charge 500 meters before he can hit Godzilla. But in the comic, they can't show that. But in a movie or TV show or whatever, they have to show that because the jump cut editing will drive people crazy. So that's what I mean by they should, even though the same events are depicted in a movie or a TV show or an animation, they have to show more to fill in the gaps for you to accept it visually. So we know that Glenn was going to be killed, yet they did not prepare the TV audience, who had way more, I guess you would say, screen presence from Glenn over the years. Or in the comic, Glenn, he was no more important than any other character. But because of the extra scenes in the show and the way the character is always in scenes, even like the scene could have been about something that Carl is doing, which had nothing to do with Glenn, but because Glenn is in the area, and it depict all the scenes, you'll see Glenn interacting in that scene, even if way that isn't directly relevant to what Carl's doing. He might still be standing there tying his shoes or helping another cat, like holding up another cast member, like if they're trying to walk in while Carl's doing his thing. In the comic, they won't show that because they're just going to focus on the 5 scenes where you see Carl doing it. But in the show, they might have 25 minutes of having to show this where you're just going to see all the background character doing stuff. So Glenn had a bigger presence in the show than he did in the comic. And the audience, the showrunner did not prepare the audience for Glenn being killed. It came out of nowhere. It was not structured narratively for the audience to be prepared for it. And then, I mean, it certainly elevated Negan into sort of like Hannibal Lecter territory is how much you hate the villain, or Hans Gruber territory if you want a more villain you love to see get killed. But it didn't do anything to let the audience be ready for the narration of the show after Glenn died. So, to be honest, after Glenn died, Walking Dead lost quite a bit of luster to like narrative structure, and audience drop in part shows that. In the case of FBI Most Wanted, while I think they did the death episode very well, I think they're going to run into the problem I just mentioned with Glenn about the narrative structure, which I'm going to talk about next. So, thirdly, when you kill off a character, I've been just mentioning this, the narrative structure of the show is going to change. The aftermath of the death. Not the immediate aftermath, but the long-term show's narrative structure. And the established, sometimes loved or love-hate character, it's often integral to its narrative structure. And I mentioned it several times, like All in the Family is built on Archie and Edith's relationship. Lee was never able to replace that core relationship in Archie Bunker's place, so the audience couldn't follow along with it. So, and here's a couple good examples of deaths that were not only done well, but the aftermath was done very well. And obviously spoilers, but it's these old stuff, so you just gotta deal with it. In Naruto, the death of Jiraiya, it brought fans to tears. And it still does. I can still watch or read those scenes and, tear up, especially now with some issues I'm going through after almost dying 2 years ago a couple of times. I'm, for whatever reason, I'm more emotional. And some scenes like that get to me, and I can even haven't watched or read it like the 4th or 5th time or whatever, it can still get to me. But the death was done well, but the aftermath of the death as part of the story was done incredibly well. The whole Pain arc and the final confrontation of Naruto with Pain, where you might hear me getting emotional in the voice. I'm trying not to lose it here, but when Naruto defeated Pain, Nagato, not by killing him, which he could have done, and he defeated him soundly physically, in terms of combat. He defeated him by making Nagato change his entire philosophical perspective back to that of their master Jiraiya. See, you hear me getting emotional about it, and it was, and that's a true victory when you can make your enemy come around to your viewpoint, and basically then self-sacrifice for the sake of that viewpoint, And Kishimoto is a master writer, and almost every death he did was not only well written but well used in the narrative. Haku's death early on and Zabuza's death early on were very instrumental to Naruto's character in developing. the harsh reality of the ninja world and so forth. But I'm not going to go on about Naruto forever. I'm just not going to do that. Another big death, also in an anime, also in a manga first, also in an anime first, then in a follow-up manga. Well, rewritten eventually in a manga, but the anime came first for Tengen Toppa Guran Langen, or TTGL as we call it. The main character was Big Brother Kamina, and he dies in like episode 8 or 9, and it was a heart-wrenching moment, but the writers used it very well, and it was a great launching point for Simone to eventually become the main character. Or another death you might have heard of in The Godfather, when Sonny Corleone dies. That death was done well in terms of the story, in terms of the story's narrative structure, but the death was also part of the narrative structure of Vito Corleone not only losing, like when Vito was shot, he lost the physical presence of being the leader of the family, but his spirit took the hit from Sonny being killed, and his lessening was part of the tradition of power for Michael to mature and become the sociopath we know from the rest of the film in Godfather 2 and 3. So those are good examples of death. And I think FBI Most Wanted is going to run into the same problem with losing Agent LaCroix. Into the problem where the narrative structure, which is built around him. In other words, there's two narrative structures in FBI Most Wanted. There's the professional part with the FBI team being depicted hunting down fugitives, and there's the family part where, yes, we see some of the family relationships of other characters, but the primary family relationship is between is with the family of LaCroix's family, with his daughter, his new wife, and his father. And not only is LaCroix gone, so we have to have a new leader coming in, which is Dylan McDermott, who's a good actor for this type of thing. But he's coming in as the leader of the FBI team. But now we have to basically have someone replace the family, the sort of supporting narrative structure with the family that we had from LaCroix's family, because those characters are all gone too. So there's a lot of work ahead of the team running FBI Most Wanted, and I'm not sure if they can do it well, but we'll see. So, in conclusion, character deaths in media probably the most potential to completely derail the experience of that media by the audience. And honestly, I don't think most writers, editors who confront these storylines, they're up to the task of making a decision to either to kill the character, or once they make the decision to kill the character, to write the death and to reconstruct the narrative structure after the character's death. And I think that's the core of the problem, is the level of writing talent and editing talent that goes into this stuff, more so than the actual deaths themselves. So, what are your thoughts on these character deaths in media, and where the character does not die as part of the media's conclusion, but in somewhere in the middle of the show's run, or book's run, or comics run, or whatever, and how it's dealt with? If you have any questions, type below. If you have any topics related to this you want, or if you have any instances of you can think of these deaths, give them below. If you like it, give me a like. If you dislike, give me a dislike. Subscribe if you want more. This is Matt from Unbearable73. Have a nice day, and I am out of here.